Hey guys, Sean here. I'm very happy to be able to sit down and give my review featuring Tales of Arise, as I did play this on the PlayStation 5. Now bear with me, as this review will be a little different in terms of formatting. You'll see in a bit, but for sure, you will be safe from spoilers, as I'm not going to be really talking about spoilers relating to the story, of course, and everything else. So you're definitely safe on that one. Before we go into the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, because it really helps out the channel, and I really appreciate it, guys. Tales of Arise is a JRPG that comes from a long-running Japanese franchise that has garnered even more popularity over the past few years, especially in these recent years thanks to a certain event that helped break that second wall for Japanese games. Anyhow, Tales of Berseria was the last game which came out in 2017 here in the States, so it has been about 4 years until Arise was released. Okay, so there are some questions, common questions, when it comes to these games, but most importantly, do I have to play the previous games to understand the story for Tales of Arise? No, usually, because these games have their own story, meaning they don't have any sequels of some kind. There are some exceptions, but here in this case with Arise, that is not the case. So therefore, you can definitely buy this game without any worry about, having to know the story from previous games. So now, what are my overall thoughts and the verdict for Tales of Arise? To me, Tales of Arise is the most streamlined Tales game that is very digestible for first-time players, but veterans such as myself may find some changes questionable at times. So kind of like what Fallout 4 was to veterans, but not as bad. It's not as game-changing nor game-breaking. Anyway, let's get over these points before I get to everything else. These points are regarding to the things that are different about Arise from the rest of the Tales games that at least I've played in the past. These points are regarding to the things that are different about Arise from the rest of the Tales games that at least I've played in the past. Firstly, Tales of Arise is among the first to not feature local multiplayer. Most older Tales games, if not all of them, feature up to 4-player co-op, which makes these JRPGs very friendly and fun whenever you have friends come over. Believe it or not, these JRPG games were great for couch co-oping. But now, with the ongoing trend of staying home and social distancing thanks to the current pandemic, this might have been a good decision in that regard. Although the reason that is most forefront is that the change in direction, including the newly introduced boost strike mechanic, which I will talk about later in this video. This would have been a very interruptive experience for the couch co-opers, so that I understand, but it's still unfortunate that they had to butcher this feature. The next point I wanted to go over is that Tales of Arise appears to be the first to completely nullify the victory screens. Usually these victory screens would follow one or more characters with one-liners or dialogue exchange to help paint relationships between each character. They're usually cool or sometimes serious, but also fun and quirky. While yes, they do say things after each battle, these dialogues I felt got glossed over easily because you're paying attention to the overworld of the game and moving forward to the objective, so it's visually less pleasing. However, that did create a more streamlined experience whenever you are grinding and fighting your way to the next destination, and thus making it possibly more easy for new players from experiencing some annoyances or any negative points of sorts. Otherwise, I do understand that it will get bothersome at some point because you're gonna have to, hear the same dialogue over and over and over again. So you do want to hit that skip button. But I do think new players would have tolerated that. They would have been okay with it. To me, I do miss these exchanges because it does help with character relationships and you connecting and liking them that much more. All you get here in Rise is that little text in the corner and the voiceover to accompany that. On to the next, and to me, the most personal and biggest point for this case is the complete change to the skits. Skits in Tales games are a series of mini cutscenes that play outside of combat, and main cutscenes and usually feature 2D sprites of the characters talking to each other, whether it's for the story or for extras. These scenes are usually charming because of the 2D sprites and how these are formatted. This further helps connect us players to the characters the most outside of the main story cutscenes. They really can be cute, adorable, depending on what the story of the skit is. It's absolutely a strong tradition for these games to feature the skits with that 2D art style. Over the years, they sort of evolved from the little squares to the full-on manga-style paneling. In my opinion, Berseria did it best, as it had the 2D sprites with half-body portions and that dynamic manga paneling to make things really engaging and more entertaining in that sense. But here in Arise, it's all gone, and instead we get these 3D models that you've been seeing in-game. While I do like the paneling here, as I did with Berseria, those 3D models don't really hit it for me. I just can't. Like, it really felt off the first time I was watching these new skits. You can really feel the stiffness here, but when it comes to 2D, it just feels natural. You're kind of just used to watching, kind of like how things go when watching anime. You can also notice the 2D absence in the info page for each character, unlike previous games. Mind you, I am a huge nerd when it comes to cartoons and anime, so you really can't blame me for loving anything and everything 2D. Having the 2D sprites help sort of break the repetitiveness from those 3D models you've been seeing all the time. Unfortunately for here, it does not happen in Arise. Even looking back at the old skits from various Tales games, I have fun watching them because of their everlasting 2D charm. I can almost guarantee that these Arise skits will not age well over time. You ever watch an old cartoon and then watch an old CGI cartoon or movie at that? Yeah, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Overall, I really do hope Namco reconsiders and returns to using 2D sprites for the future. Perhaps they made this current decision because it appears to be more modern, or they wanted to cut back some slack by just using 3D models rather than adding more sprites. Now, as much as I sound negative about this, I did like these skits for what they were. Everything else was in place, like the great paneling effects and the endearing voice acting, especially in Japanese. These skits still did the job of opening up the can of personalities and unique nuances that each characters possess. Now that's really all the changes I personally was not too fond of as a Tales fan who has played a number of these titles at this point, starting with Tales of Symphonia and some skips here and there. But now we can go into mostly the good points for Tales of Arise. Tales of Arise, while made some contrary decisions, has come to modern consoles with some sweet changes. Arise is the first Tales game to utilize the Unreal 4 engine and away from the aging in-house engine. This allows for more beautiful results with the graphical fidelity, especially with this game aiming for a more realistic approach in art direction. It's got that combination of realism and anime, and that engine really helps here. Makes you really appreciate the leap in graphical quality when you look at past Tales games. Their characters are well modeled and rendered. I mean, take a good look at Alphen's armor and Kisara's as well. That's the realistic and sort of anime combination that I'm talking about here. They all animate fantastically as well. That slight motion blur does help out quite a bit though. I was hoping there was an option to turn that off, but I guess it's supposed to be the direction they wanted to take. The environments also benefit immensely as a result of using the Unreal Engine. Adding to the visual positives, this Tales game at least still has the traditional anime cutscenes, and also it is traditional in the sense that you wish for more as always. On top of that, the game runs at a butter smooth 60 frames per second, so it had to take a lot of effects on the screen for it to even chug a little bit from my playthrough. Overall, Tales of Arise visually is the best in the Tales lineup in terms of graphical quality and in that art style combo, so it really shows that the decision to move over to the Unreal 4 engine was definitely the best decision for the Tales series. Please use this engine going forward. The highlight when it comes to the sound department is, of course, the voice acting. When it comes to the Japanese side of things, they tend to spend a good chunk of their budget on their voice actors, or seiyus in this case. As I played this entirely in Japanese, I very much enjoyed the performances from each character, all equally smashing. This is one of the more emotionally driven storylines, and the actors hit it out of the park. It really made these characters all the more likable. The music soundtrack in this Tales game is overall more towards in the middle. While there are some cool tracks, the music feels more mundane in comparison. The battle theme here, I felt, was lost this time around with the sounds of battle because of the lack of that oomph that I kind of look forward to with their music, or just, just that cool factor. I actually would not mind if Arise had some DLC music tracks from other Tales games such as Dawn of the New World. I certainly like the songs provided by the game, specifically Hello Again and Blue Moon. Tales games tend to be very story driven as much as the gameplay is a forefront. This title overall features a story that's relatively easy to follow, as it features a man and woman from each conflicting nation banding together as an odd pair. Of course, over time we see lots of character progression as the party grows, and further we go into the story. I won't spoil it here, but I just wanted to say that I really like the story for what it was presented here. Is it the most deep or rich lore for JRPGs? Not so much, but it was still presented more than well enough to make a fantastic story to tell. I really like these characters that you journey with throughout the game. It did leave me that similar feeling when I finished Persona 5, that feeling you get when you finish that anime that you really love. Like, it kind of gets sad that it has come to an end, because you just want more of it, but you kind of want a conclusive ending at the same time. You know what I'm saying here? This was all thanks to the excellent and wholesome writing. These characters are all equally lovable, with not only for their voices, quirks, but their sense of growth and progression throughout the adventure. Especially with my boy, Law. He's definitely not only cool, funny, strong, but I can definitely relate to him on a more personal level. For those who do follow me on the channel, you may know where I'm coming from. Kisara is really cool just solely for her enthusiasm for fishing, which is another thing I can relate to. Now, when it comes to the main female protagonist, Shion, she is also lovable as a glutton that you just look forward to anything food related, because it's just too funny every time.
なんていうか、空色の宝石みたいだ。
コバルトブルートラウトというんだ。とても珍しいらしい。私も釣れるとは思わなかった。どんな味がするのかしら。
え？
On top of that, all their fighting styles and gameplay and sort of gimmicks are all fun in their own way as well. Especially Rinwell, she's pretty strong in my opinion. Speaking of which, the gameplay is the important part because, of course, this ain't no anime, this is a video game. Tales games to all tend to feel familiar with each other, at least to some degree, but they always change things here and there and update other parts of the game as well. Arise is, of course, a JRPG with real-time combat. This game is a good middle ground when it comes to accessibility and intuitive satisfaction as a Tales title. You perform a series of moves or arts in combo strings, which tends to make Tales games feel like fighting games at times. You enlist more and more arts as you level up your skills and create even more devastating combos on the fly, which is something I always love with Tales games. This time around for Arise here, the Boost Strike feature, as briefly mentioned beforehand, is the new feature that distinguishes this game from the rest. Boost Strikes allow you to use your party members in and out of combat to deal a devastating blow called boost attacks to the enemy with specific effects. For example, Shion can shoot down flying enemies so that the melee fighters can, well, hit them. These attacks do have cooldown, but under certain conditions, the cooldown timer can get reduced. This feature also builds up a gauge when hitting enemies in succession. Once you do build up that meter, you hit that D-pad to execute the Boost Strike finish, which essentially is a stylish way to end the enemy quickly. Visually, it features the leading character, which depends on how your team is set up, and a random partner during that strike. Each of these do feature different combination attacks, which is actually really cool. My only complaint here is that these attacks tend to look too fast for you to try and appreciate to see how cool it looks. If it was just a tad slower or something like that, it would have been, more on the perfect side, but that could have been a result of that streamlined experience. So maybe they hit fast forward on that part on purpose so that, you don't have to go through that again and again when you're grinding and stuff like that. But I think this was a bit too much. But this could have been also the result of this game being primarily developed on PS4 and then later on to PS5, which might have contributed to the delay besides the pandemic. Basically, another way to say this is that the PS5 may be a little too fast for the game. But with that said, the loading times are pretty nice. Otherwise, the boost strike feature is a welcome one that rewards you more CP with each strike as the ender for each battle. CP, or cure points, is, at least to me, pretty new here. Because of how the action gauge works in this game, it would have been pretty OP for you to be able to heal with the arts or spells techniques if it ran on action gauge, so it got its own gauge along with support arts as well. It essentially is a universal MP gauge for the entire party. Previously, that wasn't sort of the case. Anyway, you can also use CP to open secret passageways that hold possibly treasure that for the most part comes with cool stuff. So you do want to be very careful to manage the gauge, because once it's low, you can't heal your party. The game also emphasizes on defensive mechanics such as perfect dodging or perfect guarding, rewarding you with more damage or special effects. Moving along, each party member offers something pretty unique to the table, and I have fun using all the characters for their moves and styles, so it's pretty hard to say outright who is my favorite off the bat. But I will say that Rinwell, the mage of the party, is pretty good because you can access to powerful arts just by charging up the weaker ones with a charge mechanic or magic charge mechanic. There are some updates to the mechanic that I really like, such as the action gauge being consistently the same amount despite being stunned or getting hit by different effects like you do in Berseria. That was one of the frustrating things that I got from Berseria, but not the case here. There are some complaints about the combat itself, and some of the arts can be deemed less useful because there are attacks that don't track the enemy well and makes the characters whiff completely. There are also arts which take longer to recover from the attack animation, meaning that every time you use this certain arts, for example, like the Orochi Wind slash or whatever with Alphen, you're risking your character getting hit by the other enemies, the ones that are just free. This problem severely affects the melee character, so you'll end up putting a certain number of arts to the side and just favor for a handful of them, which can limit your sense of freedom in a way. If you don't care about that too much, then it's less apparent, but it can be frustrating the more I think about it. But when it comes to the combat, it's still good old Tales style of fun to me. I had a blast using the boost strike mechanic to its fullest, especially once I got used to it. Now for the mini game, fishing in this Tales game, oh boy. At first, the controls were whooping my ass on top of the fish themselves, but once you get the better rods, as you get more fish, then you'll be fine. Nonetheless, it was a fine way to earn extra money and ingredients for cooking, as it was strangely addicting at times. Even if you hear Kisara moaning and groaning for hours, fishing in JRPG games are always a fun time. I kinda just wish you were able to pick other characters to fish with to kinda, spice it up a bit. The exploration was a pleasant experience as the environments were aesthetically vast in comparison to its bland environments from its older brethren. There are plenty of hidden treasures and collectibles for costume pieces, so keep your eyes peeled. Now on the topic of costumes. Costumes in Tales games are also a strong tradition, but unfortunately the costumes you get in-game this time around are pretty meager. There are no Tales costumes to unlock as it was, part of that tradition as well. Not here though, which is kinda sad. All the cool ones are locked behind paid DLC. They're not just costumes either. They offer titles that unlock important abilities early on in the game if you do purchase these costumes right off the bat, such as KO prevention. Speaking of titles are now essentially just skill panels which unlocks through natural progression along with certain objectives. Like let's say doing side quests and doing a number of these things or collecting this number of things, so on and so forth. These give you the opportunity to unlock more moves and perks for each character, which was all new to me and an update I can definitely get behind because in all the games you can only pick one title at a time and each title had, different stat boosts, but you can only pick one at a time, so you had to, really pick and choose for each character. Last worthy mention is the grinding. You don't get to grind as much as it feels like the reverse S type of growth, so by the time you surpass the enemy's levels, it really starts to slow down. That way, by the time you reach to the boss, you're not too over leveled so that the challenge is still there. You can boost your level intake, I guess, or experience intake by managing the XP boost meter. Once that turns blue, whether you just fight enemies or you use the happy bottles, you can get a boost for experience intake. As someone who did play this on normal, it was still pretty tough in some fights. I did get wiped in some of them. Some quests are pretty tough without you knowing them, so you have to be careful of what you choose and save often. And that's how I feel with Tales of Arise. It's a very good game from the Tales franchise, although changes were made in order to be more digestible for newcomers. While some key aspects were absent for these changes, the essential Tales experience is still intact thanks to the lovable characters and of course the fun combat on top of a very engaging story as well, or at least quite engaging. I was able to beat the game around 75 hours-ish. That was with side quests and some level of grinding, which is a little more on the shorter side, but I think a part of that could be with the streamlining, but also with the loading times. With every loading moment, it could really add up to, whether it's a longer or shorter playtime significantly. But even after beating it, there are still things to do in post-game, so there is a nice amount of content in total. So with that, this game is a solid package as a JRPG in my opinion. So as a solid game and a nice package, it really deserves my most solid 8 out of 10 and my recommendation for those who are into JRPGs or Tales fans of course, despite the changes that I talked about. There is DLC as of recent with the collab of SAO of all things, or Sword Art Online, which is actually pretty cool. I would like to see more of that in the future. With all that said though, is this my favorite Tales game? Is it high up there? That's really hard to say. Maybe I'll think about that in another video, but it is still a solid Tales game no less. So thank you guys very much. This has been my review for Tales of Arise. Hope you guys enjoyed it. What do you guys think? For those who did enjoy Tales of Arise, please leave those comments in comment section below, without spoiling things of course. I really appreciate that. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, because that's also very much helpful, and I do appreciate that as well. So again, this has been my review for Tales of Arise. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys in the next video. Sean out.